story. A powerful U.S. Congressional Committee is telling American companies not to do business with China's two largest telecommunication companies, Huawei and ZTE. It's the latest in a series of reported concerns about these companies, which nonetheless are increasingly increasing their share of the U.S. telecom market. So, is it fair that the U.S. government takes sides? CCTV's Jessica Stone is here to watch the latest developments. I know you've been on the phone. You've been working very hard on this big story over the past 24, 48 hours. What do we know so far?
Well, this was an 11th-month investigation, Phil, and it also included meetings between congressional investigators and senior Huawei and ZTE officials in Shenzhen, China. But it ends with little trust on either side. In fact, the chief spokesperson here in the United States for Huawei now says the report could threaten American jobs created by business with Huawei.
Huawei and ZTE, two major telecommunications companies based in China, each doing business in 140 countries around the world, including the United States.
Well, good morning.
But on Monday, an explosive report from the U.S. Congress. Its chief authors alleged a cozy relationship between the corporations and the Chinese government, allowing Beijing to access and meddle with critical U.S. technological infrastructure.
Huawei and ZTE seek to expand in the United States, but as a result of our investigation, we do not have the confidence that these two companies, with their ties to the Chinese government, can be entrusted with infrastructure of such critical importance.
The report's evidence? The companies failed to explain their relationship with the Chinese government to the satisfaction of the U.S. Congress. The companies acknowledge Communist Party offices located on site, which is a common practice, even for Western companies operating in China. The report also points out that Huawei's founder, Ren Zhengfei, served in the Chinese army, and the company still has military ties.
Huawei is Huawei. Huawei is not China. Whatever concerns that the committee or the U.S. government has with the state, the government of another state, or vice versa, has nothing to do with my company.
The report acknowledges a reality for every country, that national security is increasingly dictated by computer network security, which relies on parts from a global supply chain, including Asia, Europe, and the U.S.
The world is deeply interconnected, and we are increasingly and will increasingly rely on the global telecommunications backbone for our personal data and communications, but also for our national security information as well.
As a result, the report calls on the U.S. government to block acquisitions, takeovers, or mergers with Huawei and ZTE, and says high-security computer networks should not include component parts from those companies. The authors also call on Huawei in particular to be, quote, more transparent. Huawei spokesman says limiting his company's growth will limit job creation in the U.S. and around the world.
These recommendations put at risk American jobs. These recommendations put at risk hundreds of millions of dollars of investment from outside the U.S. in this country.
All right. As you're listening, that was Huawei's Vice President of External Relations reacting to the allegations. We now turn to ZTE. I had a chance to speak to the company's spokesperson, and I asked him about some of these allegations and also asked about how ZTE poses no security threat to the U.S. as he defends.
I don't think that ZTE poses any threat to the United States national security because ZTE's equipment is safe. ZTE, we already cooperate more than 500 operators around the world, more than 140 countries in the world. So we have our special trusted delivery model. This kind of solution will help ZTE to prove that our solution is safe to all the countries. We already submitted our proposal regarding how to solve this kind of national security issues. We called it trusted delivery model. That means ZTE, we will choose a third-party partner here. This partner is a truly independent partner, which oversight by the U.S. government and has capabilities to detect all the hardware, software, and firmware, this kind of issues.
I want to help clarify something. The Intelligence Committee said that both companies did not provide enough clear information, in other words, transparency, to the investigators. Did you provide enough information?
Actually, ZTE, we set an unprecedented standard regarding the cooperation with committee during the investigation. And we have only 3 weeks to submit all the materials. And there are almost 80 questions related to ZTE, including internal operation, including the connection with the government or some other departments. Another issue is that we have to consider about the possibility of the information will be disclosed or not to the United States, because some kind of information it could be kind of confidential according to Chinese law.
Why do you think the U.S. congressional investigators are unhappy with the information you provided? Is it because they didn't like the information, or do they not have enough information?
I do think that the lack of understanding of China's government and China's enterprises operation. That's one point. Another point is that I think maybe when we view these matters, our understanding is that we provide enough materials, try our best to do that. But their point of view is that you haven't provided enough materials.
What is the relationship between ZTE and the government of China?
ZTE is based in Shenzhen, headquartered in China. So we are a global focused company, but our headquarters is in China. We have to obey all the laws in China. And also, we have to comply with all the regulations in China. And we also need to communicate with different departments in China. That's natural for all the Chinese-based.
You are regulated by the Chinese government,
yeah.
So there is going to be a natural interaction with Chinese regulators, correct?
Yeah, correct.
What's the relationship between ZTE and the military of China?
If you review the report, there's no evidence or there's no point related to ZTE's connection to the military.
On the Huawei, and I can certainly understand you may not have all the details about Huawei, what is the relationship between ZTE and Huawei, because you are one of 2 named companies in the report?
Through the competition between ZTE and Huawei, we grow very fast. So it's good for both of us. And ZTE, different from Huawei, ZTE is listed in Shenzhen and Hong Kong.
And Hong
From
Kong?
A-share to H-share. ZTE is the first company from A-share to H-share market. That means transparency of ZTE is worldwide.
All right, so we've heard from both companies, ZTE and Huawei. You've been working on this. What's the reaction thus far from the Chinese government?
Well, we did get a statement from the Chinese ministry spokesperson Hong Lei, reading in part, investment by China's telecommunications companies in the United States showed the countries have mutually beneficial relations. We hope the U.S. will do more to benefit the interests of the 2 countries, not the opposite, sort of the implication being that it is doing the opposite.
There's a lot of different angles to this story. I know you're working on this other one, and that is the fact that how does this affect U.S. companies? Because there's a lot of different relationships here that I don't think a lot of people realize.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, and I know we're going to explore that more, but the vice president who we talked to for this piece said that actually 1/3 of the parts that Huawei uses come from U.S. suppliers, totaling some $6.6 billion just for U.S. companies alone. The idea being this is going to impact U.S. jobs if Huawei decides to not do business with U.S. companies.
I didn't have a chance to ask the spokesperson in an interview, and if I could, I'd ask the Huawei spokesperson the same question: is United States, Cisco, Juniper, there's plenty of technology companies that do business all around the world. China is no different. So you have U.S. IT firms doing work, may not be necessarily high-end military work, but significant amount of government work in other parts of the world, including China.
Right, and that's also interesting because they have not sort of choked off the pipeline of U.S. companies doing business in China as they haven't expressed the same level of concerns that we're hearing from the U.S. Congress. We know that we can show you actually digital pipes, the digital plumbing, the so-called critical infrastructure of China actually has 3 American companies at least working on it in Shandong province and Hunan province. These are companies like Cisco Systems, like Extreme Networks, and like Juniper. So we really are a very interconnected world in business, in government, and in employees, and the idea that you can just simply follow the recommendations in this U.S. congressional report and simply cut off this business, not really realistic given the amount of technology that is intertwined and the parts that are intertwined in the supply chain.
I have a feeling this is certainly not the end that we're going to hear of the story, probably just the beginning. Jessica Stone, thank you so much for your time and analysis on this. We now stay with this theme, Huawei's plans to expand in the U.S. hitting a major roadblock. As you know, U.S. lawmakers accusing the IT company as a national security threat. Now it plans to broaden its presence of 1,800 employees in the U.S., but that could very much be in doubt. Karina Huber investigates.
Huawei, as a leading global ICT solution.
Huawei has been increasingly eyeing the U.S. market. It has television ads targeting U.S. consumers. It has also substantially increased its U.S. lobbying efforts, spending $820,000 so far this year. That's more than double the amount spent last year. Currently, the bulk of Huawei's U.S. revenue comes from selling low-cost phones to Sprint, T-Mobile, and Verizon. But the company wants to provide more high-tech components to the United States, an effort that could be stymied by a congressional report accusing the company of being a threat to national security.
Now that they're trying to enter the U.S. market in a bigger way, especially in the enterprise market and getting into cloud computing and things like that, they're going to face a lot of headwinds going forward.
In a 2011 letter requesting a U.S. government investigation to clear itself from unsubstantiated charges, Huawei's vice chairman expressed, quote, faith in the fairness and justice of the United States, calling allegations that Huawei had close connections with the Chinese military unfounded and unproven. Today's report cited no evidence that Huawei committed any act to compromise the national security of the United States. However, the political headwinds resulting from this report could spread to Europe, where Huawei has a much bigger presence. Huawei recently surpassed Sweden's Ericsson to become the world's largest telecom company, and Walston says the Europeans are not happy about it.
Now they're bigger than most European telecommunications firms. The European countries have an incentive now to look at them. Most of this is probably due to protectionism more than to national security issues. And in that case, they certainly have an incentive to look at Huawei.
Huawei denies the congressional allegations and says it has a proven track record of network security in the United States. But the damage to its reputation may be enough to scare off potential partners and contracts. Karina Huber, CCTV, New York.